second, our neighbor from New Haven, Vermont. New Haven? Are you in New Haven?
Yeah.
Yeah, New Haven. I figure if I don't know where something is in Addison County, it's in New Haven because it's a big, strangely shaped town. Kirk Webster, who is a celebrated beekeeper, a person who thinks about what the life of farming means, and who has, among other things, developed a system of breeding mite and blight-resistant queens. Is that right? Both things true?
Well, you could say disease-resistant.
Disease-resistant. That would have been a better thing to say. But Kirk has done this in very interesting ways. And it's nice that Kirk will follow Bill, because Bill wrote a book called Oil and Honey, in which he thought about climate change and fossil fuels, and also the meaning of a farmer like Kirk doing his work.
Thanks, Bill. There are just so many fascinating things about bees going on right now. I think I'll just try to give you a little bit of perspective from the point of view of someone who makes his living from bees, who's really focused a lot on just the practical aspects of keeping the bees alive, keeping them productive, and just some of the things I have discovered in that journey. There are just so many things to touch on, even just based on some of the things Bill said. Honeybees are incredibly adaptable creatures, and I do think that the bees will be able to adapt to almost anything the climate can throw at them. You know, we're the ones that are having trouble with the adaptations. You know, I haven't seen any, really off the charts changes from the climate here, even though, since '06, the pattern right here in Middlebury has been quite different from what it was in the past. It's made it much more difficult to produce honey and bees here, but I have a friend who takes bees from South Dakota to Texas every year, and he's caught in this terrible mess they have in Texas right now. And about 6 years ago, in his location in South Dakota, the temperature after several days of being in the one-teens, temperature got up to 124 degrees, and 80% of his bees died in that one afternoon. That is something I've never, ever heard of before. So, these things are affecting the bees, but I'll just go back to 1972 when I first came here and started to work with bees with Charlie Mraz. And the thing that's really different now in the second half of my career is that the honeybee has entered the public consciousness. And this was not true at all in the whole first half of my career. Anytime I went to a party or a gathering of any kind, I had to start from scratch to explain what I was doing and what I was working with. Now everybody knows something about honeybees, and if you haven't heard the latest news about them, you can just stop someone randomly on the street and ask them, and they can fill you in. So that's just been an amazing change, for us as beekeepers to observe, and it has, resulted in a cascade of other changes in understanding about the environment, and which is, just so interesting and, and heartening to hear. And one of my my pet projects that I am trying to work on now is to try to figure out a way to use honeybees to evaluate the overall health of an ecosystem, and a set of parameters that could be collected from any honeybee colony anywhere, and to get enough of them together to start to show where our most healthy ecosystems are and where the unhealthy ones. And this would be especially true of our man-altered ecosystems, and agrarian and suburban ecosystems too. But anyway, I'm sort of starting at the wrong end. I've just been focused for many years on trying to figure out how to make a living from bees, and I started this more than 20 years ago to work on breeding honeybees here in this climate, which was kind of a pioneering thing at that time. Most of the honeybee selection in North America was done in California and the Deep South for many years, with supplying queen bees and package bees in the spring for beekeepers in the north. And I was one of the first to start working on that here, and then that grew into a program of breeding bees to resist pests and diseases, especially as these two mite pests came from Europe and Asia, which just changed beekeeping completely. And the climate's had an effect on beekeeping, but beekeeping was already going through this drastic period of change brought on by the tracheal and the varroa mites that were brought here, in which our bees had never been exposed to before. And the serendipitous thing that happened here was that we had the tracheal mite from Europe arrived first. And that was the first really serious challenge to the health of honeybees that I had to face, during my career. And it just seemed like the end of the world when half of the colonies would perish during the winter, whereas before that, a 5 or a 10% winter loss was considered to be a heavy loss. So all of a sudden, we were losing half the colonies over the winter. And that happened to be just at the time when I was starting to work on overwintering small colonies of bees, or nucleus colonies of bees, and then using them to replace my losses and then later for sale. And actually, that has been the most important and powerful technique that I have worked with in my career, this raising new queen bees in this kind of a northern climate in the midsummer, and then overwintering them for their first winter in a small colony. It's a pretty simple concept, but no one had developed it as a system before. The other interesting aside is, if you look back in the old beekeeping literature, you can find beekeepers doing this in the early 1900s and writing about it, and then it was just completely forgotten. But anyway, it's a story for another time, but I just discovered this could work by accident and gradually built it up into the basis of my whole system here. So anyway, it's, again, these two mite pests were the biggest practical problem that we've had to face as beekeepers. And the way that I have dealt with it used breeding and management things together, in which I still believe you need to have both of those in order to overcome the problem, that neither of them by themselves is enough. So, am I close here?
You're good. Say anything you'd like to say. Funny time, but you're great.
Yeah. So anyway, that became the basis of what I'm doing now. That's the other important connection, is that I didn't grow up with farming and agriculture, and I just developed an interest as a teenager and pursued it from there. And I've had some really wonderful mentors, and one of those mentors had a direct connection with the beginning of the organic farming movement in England, and Sir Albert Howard and his disciples. And so that made a big impression on me, even though Sir Albert Howard doesn't have anything about bees in any of his books. I've actually used his methods in my own program. And the good news is, with Sir Albert Howard's concept was that pests and diseases should always be regarded as friends and allies rather than enemies, and should be used to help us evaluate and tune up our practices. And when the tracheomites first came and infested my bees and killed half of them for 3 different seasons, and I propagated them back from the best survivors, and in about 5 years, the practical part of the problem seemed to be over. The bees seemed to be similar to the way they were before, except they were much better in several regards than they had been before the mites came. And I finally realized that this was another case where the mites had helped me to select the bees. They had selected a better bee than I had to begin with. And it was only that experience that enabled me to repeat the process when the varroa mite came, which was a much more difficult pest to deal with, and the process has taken much longer. But anyway, that's what I'll end with, I guess. That's the basis of my approach to beekeeping, and the philosophy of Sir Robert Howard has proven itself even in this very extreme case of the invasion of the varroa mite. So I think I better stop there.